I was black in this 30-minute game with no increment. I was quite pleased with how it went. It was probably my best classical game on Lichess since I started this account. Here's the rating or score history of the game. And it says I had 1 inaccuracy, no mistakes, no blunders, 21 average cent pawn loss. My opponent played pretty well too. 5 inaccuracies, only 1 mistake, 1 blunder, 43 average cent pawn loss. Okay, so there's at least 1 or 2 things I want to learn about this game, even though it went so well. Let's have a look. Okay, so right away I don't know this move d3. It looks very passive. It blocks in this bishop. So I don't know the point of playing like that. I was surprised to learn after the game that this is called the Leonardis variation. I know there are some Blackburn defenses and variations in different openings. My name is Leonard Blackburn, so here's another opening similar to my name. Okay, I just developed sensibly. My opponent makes another passive move. He's maybe trying to restrict my pieces here. Bishop c5, just posting my bishop to a nice diagonal. Okay, since he has no intent of playing d4 apparently. Okay, knight f3, d6, bishop e2. And this kind of position I don't do so well with. It's very similar to Gioco piano position, but this bishop is inside the pawn chain rather than on the active c4 square, which is why I think this is a poor opening for white to play this d3 move and keep your bishop in there. It's very, very passive. But it's similar, and some of the themes that I still don't understand are, when do you pin the knight? In this case, it's not going to be pinned if I play bishop g4, but sometimes it is. Sometimes this bishop is outside the pawn chain. When do you move knight to f6 and allow your knight to be pinned? When do you chase it away with h6 and g5? Do you play h6 first to stop the pin from occurring? These things I need to study. I need to understand this more deeply, and I don't. So the computer did not like my move bishop to g4. It swung from a negative 0.1 to a plus 0.6. So that's at least an inaccuracy, but it didn't get recorded as one. Maybe the reason is the bishop just doesn't belong there because it's not pinning the knight, and if the knight ever moves, I'm just going to be trading my good bishop for his bad bishop. So maybe the bishop belongs on e6 instead. But probably not on that move. I didn't want to face something like knight g5. All right, so anyway, he castles h6. So that's a passive move. That's what I'm talking about. I don't know if I should be playing that before I play knight f6 or not. Okay, knight c3. The computer suggested a more active plan is to push c3 and d4 and expand in the center. Now, knight c3, I do know that this kind of thing does occur in the Gioco piano as well. I do know that sometimes white wants to gain the bishop pair by playing knight a4 here. So I get a square for my bishop. I regretted a6 though. I think a5 is better because it fights against b4. But I played a6 to get this escape square for my bishop. Knight d5. Knight g e7. I want to keep my f-pawn unblocked. I'm thinking of pushing it to f5 at some point in the future and getting the open f-file since his knight is in front of his f-pawn. Okay, c4. I thought that was a horrible positional idea to give himself this big hole in the position. So I like that hole so much, I remove his knight on f3 and then sink my knight into the hole. He plays bishop to e3. c6. So his knight was sitting on a nice outpost, but it wasn't a hole because I had this pawn to push. So he trades off his knights. He plays b4, and I drop my bishop back to my nice retreat square. He takes on d4, but I think putting my bishop is even stronger than putting my knight on that hole. The reason this bishop is so strong here is because it's pinning that f pawn to the king, and it's participating in an attack on that castled king. So already I strategically much prefer black in this position. He saves his rook, I castle, he moves his bishop to a more active square. Maybe he wants to move his f-pawn, but he can't yet, it's pinned. Okay, g6. So I'm expanding my pawns here. I'm supporting both h5 and f5. It's okay to move your pawns in front of your king if you're putting them on light squares and he only has a light squared bishop. He doesn't have a dark squared bishop to take advantage of the dark squared weaknesses. So sometimes you can do that. And likewise, he puts his pawns on dark squares because I don't have a light squared bishop. Okay, I expand. He moves his bishop to safety. I bring my king up with the intent of possibly putting a rook on the h file here. I might open it, push h4. But also it looks more solid up here, protecting the g6 square, especially if I'm going to be pushing this f-pawn. Okay, so he stops me from pushing my h-pawn, probably a good idea. So I push my f-pawn. I want to open up the f-file. I want to attack his king now. Okay, exchanges. I've got that half-open f-file. He attacks my rook, I drop it back. King to g2. I don't fully understand why the engine says it goes from negative 1.9 to negative 4.6. It's a blunder. He does want to unpin his f-pawn, so I didn't analyze deeply into this. It doesn't look horrible to me, although my position looked pretty close to winning to me anyway. But he plays his king up, unpins his f-pawn, I double my rooks, and he pushes his f-pawn. I think the problem with that strategy, I think he's trying to get really solid here. I think the problem with that strategy is his bishop is locked in, and it has no moves. I can threaten to win it. I can maybe push d5 at some point. In fact, that was my plan. I put my queen on the d file to support the d5 push to win his bishop. Okay, queen to b3 stops that idea of winning the bishop because the queen is supporting that square now. But I put a rook on that d file and threaten it again. And that pretty much forces him to push his f-pawn forward to give himself an escape square for his bishop, but that just allows me to open up the position. And he can't really take back here because there's queen to g4 in that position. So he drops his bishop back. I double rooks. b5, that's a nice attempt to get some counterplay. He wants to take one of my pawns and then play queen takes b7 and pin my queen to my king and exchange queens. So I exchange my a pawn for his b pawn, and then I push my other pawn forward to block that b file. But he plays queen to d5 to threaten to take here anyway. I move a rook up to that rank to protect it. Rook be1. It's pretty much hopeless at this point. I'm a pawn up. His king is very weak. I've got control of that f file. My bishop is strongly posted on d4. F takes g3. Queen g5. He's pinning this pawn. He's threatening some counterplay here, but I've got it all under control. In fact, I calculated I can take that b5 pawn and not even protect this because I always have queen takes d3, which also supports this weak square. So he takes that pawn, queen takes d3. He takes a rook, and at this point I realize I have a nice tactic to win this bishop. So I take his rook with my bishop, ejecting his queen. His queen moves back, and that allows me this fork. So I win the bishop, and the game's over. Okay, and it's just elementary from here. I take the time to pick off his pawns. And I guard the queen square, and he resigns. All right, thanks for watching the game.